I hope you're all having a good day. Hello, everyone. Hi. Welcome. Let me adjust this microphone. Okay. Hi, everybody. So, welcome. Welcome to. All right. Hello. Excuse me. Welcome to UnboundVerse. And today we're going to be talking about faith, leadership, and national development. Okay? Faith, leadership, and national development. So, just today, I saw a video on YouTube about one of my favorite clergyman in Nigeria, and he was saying something, retracting a statement that he had put out years ago. I mean, not too long ago, but a couple of years ago. When that statement was made back then, it didn't sit well in my soul. I didn't like it. It doesn't sit well. It wasn't right. I didn't see it as normal. Like when I say that statement now, you will all know what I'm talking about and who I'm talking about. So when that statement was made, I felt some type of way about the statement, but I didn't say anything. I just kept it to myself, and I didn't want to let anybody, I left it to people to make that decision on their own. And so today I saw that video on YouTube where he came out. He said he was sorry. He said he was sorry about that statement. And then when I was further listening to his retraction, he then made things worse. And I was like, what's going on? This is not an apology. This is a I'm coming for you guys statement. Like, this is a you guys haven't seen nothing statement. It didn't sound like a retraction, for me when I listened to that video. In the person of Pastor E.A. Adeboye. That's who I'm talking about. Some of you may have seen the video and all that, but so that prompted me to make this live, and you will see the video later on. I'm gonna release it out. So, and I titled the video Leadership, Faith, and National Development. How did these three help or support each other? How does these three words relate to each other? All right, again, welcome to a conversation about faith, leadership, and national development. In today's video, we dive into a crucial question. How can religious leaders like Pastor Enoch Adeboye, one of Nigeria's most influential figures, shape the intellectual and the economic future of the country? We explored this recent video that got controversial statements on tithing and the role of the church, asking tough questions about whether faith-based teachings are empowering or limiting Nigerians' progress. That's actually a good question. Is faith-based teaching helping Nigeria to develop? You're gonna find out in this video while we continue. So what does this mean for the growing tech and innovation scenes in Nigeria? How can faith coexist with critical thinking and entrepreneurship? Stay tuned as we explore the complex intersection of faith, leadership, and national development, examining practical ways Pastor E.A. Adeboye could leverage his influence to promote education, critical thinking, and even political stability. Let's start the conversation that could perhaps reshape the future of Nigeria. Okay, so that's my introduction, right? And if you're watching from Nigeria right now, this is a perfect time for you to grab a chair and sit down, because some serious questions are gonna be answered on this video, honestly and practically, and we're all going to see for ourselves how these things could be so. Okay, so the way this session is gonna go is that I'm gonna read out some critical questions that some people ask about that video and about Pastor E.A. Adeboye and other things, right? So the first question was, is it true that Pastor E.A. Adeboye apologized about the 10% and added more percentage recently? Is it true that Pastor Enoch Adeboye apologized about the 10% and added more percentage in the process of apologizing? So here's what I found out. Yes, it is true. Yes, Pastor Enoch Adeboye, the General Overseer of the Redeemed Christian Church of God, RCCG, recently apologized for his earlier statement claiming that those who do not pay tithes would not make it to heaven. That was the statement I was talking about earlier. When that statement came out years ago, it didn't sit well in my heart. I'm like, this cannot be true in any way. Like, because you don't pay tithes, you're not going to heaven. This cannot be true. This is some bollocks, the way they say it in the European country. It's some bollocks. So he admitted that the statement was not biblical. However, in his apology, he also made comments suggesting that tithing should not be limited to 10%. Here's where I started feeling kind of like the same way I felt when he first said, if you don't pay tithes, you will not make it to heaven. You know, when I heard should not be limited to 10%, I'm like, what? I thought this was an apology. Wait, this is not looking like an apology anymore. This is beginning to look like I'm gonna show you. You guys haven't had enough, right? I'm gonna show you more. So I'm continuing to listen, and he said he's encouraging some people to give 20%, 30%, or even 40%. based on their capacity. See, this man is very smart. 20%, 30%, 40%, and then he added based on their capacity. Based on their capacity. So what's the point for making note of the 20%, 30%, and 40%, and then adding based on their capacity? So he's very smart guy. All right. So he emphasized that 10% is just for beginners. What? 10% is just for beginners? Where are we going? What? 10% is just for beginners, implying that more mature Christians might consider giving more, although he also clarified that tithing is not compulsory. See why I told you this guy is a very smart guy. This is somebody I respect, okay? No doubt about that. I respected him a lot more back then when I was a very, 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 very young and, trying to learn guy. So, very long time ago, I used to see him in my dream. Like, I would see him in my dream. He would extend his hands out to me and we will walk together. That's how much I respected this guy. Now, if he had that kind of influence on me back then, what about other millions of people? And let me tell you one thing. Pastor Adeboye has audiences in the millions, all combined, in the millions. And this is just my own perception of his influence. I think his influence is kind of like general on all these millions of people. So yes, he did retracted that statement, but then added more. This is a smart guy. He added more. He said, "Say, una never see Pepe, I will show una Pepe." That's what I got from, But the truth is that I still respect him, but not like before. I respect him as a human being, but not like before, So, Pastor Adeboye's recent statements have stirred a lot of discussions. While he apologized for the claim that non-payment of tithes would bar people from heaven, he also mentioned that limiting tithe to 10% is not ideal for everyone. Meaning, if you're not making the same amount of pay, it's not ideal for all of you to be paying 10%. All right, that's kind of logical, okay? If on a normal regular scale, that's kind of logical. If you're not making $1 million, annually, right? Your contribution should be less than somebody that is making way over $1 million every year. If all you're making is $100,000 annually, and someone else is making $1 million annually, okay, maybe they can both afford to pay. If we're gonna go by the percentage thing, the $100,000 guy can afford to pay his 10%, and the $1 million guy can also afford to pay his 10%. But which one is gonna be easy? Which one is gonna find it more easy to pay that 10%? It has to be the $1 million guy. If they all have the same expenditures, like if they all spend their money on the same thing. So the guy with the $1 million annually should find it way easy to pay his 10% compared to the guy that's making $100,000 every year. So that kind of makes sense, but it is still up to both of them to want to give. Okay, it's not compulsory, and that's what he's saying in his statement. He's saying that it is not mandatory. Okay, so this in his revised stance now, right? In his revised stance, he suggested that more committed Christians, depending on their financial capability, might consider giving 20%, 30%, or even 40%. Did you guys hear that? You can see how smart this guy has become. He has noticed that, wait a minute, 10% is not cutting it. I'm not being fair on these guys, even though it's not biblical. Before, there was not a debate about it not being biblical, right? Now there's a debate about it not biblical, after a lot of people came out and discussed, critically about it. After people like Damina came out to talk about it, people like Daddy Freeze came out to talk about it. A lot of people came out to talk about it. So I guess he had to, rechange or readjust his stance. And he came out with his new stance now. His new stance is suggesting that more committed Christians, depending on their financial capability, might consider giving 20%, 30%, or even 40%. So even though he said might, he's not mandating them to pay that 20%, 30%, 40%. But let me tell you something. The influence of Pastor Adeboye on millions of Nigeria is very, very tight. That influence is gripping. Like, even though he's not saying I'm mandating it on you guys, just him saying that, some people are going to take that as an instruction from the Holy Spirit that, oh yes, now 20%, 30%, 40%. The last time he talked about the 10%, that whoever is not paying their 10%, they're not gonna make heaven. Back then, he mandated them. Because I watched that video and it broke my heart a lot. I'm not gonna lie. That statement broke my heart back then. I got over it, and now he came up with a more generalized instruction, but we know what's gonna happen. We know not all of his followers, will take it by the way it is. Some of them will take it to the letter and 20%, 30%, 40%. They will even come up with some new type of proportionating it. So we know that. Now, when I heard that, I was like, wait a minute. This is not no retraction, not no apology. This is a goddamn, I'm gonna show you more. So this suggestion, however, has been met with criticism from various quarters, just like I'm doing now. I'm criticizing it, especially due to the economic hardship many people are facing in Nigeria. Okay, a lot of people are facing a lot of hardship in Nigeria. Guys, if you're not from Nigeria, you're not gonna have an idea what what it feels like to not be living in Nigeria. You're not gonna have an idea of what it feels like to not be living in Nigeria. The hardship over there is to the roof right now. So some viewed it as an attempt to increase church donation, while others believe that his teaching on tithing continues to stray from biblical principles. Of course, it's strayed from biblical principle right from a long time ago when they are making that stuff a big deal. The little I know about the Bible, is that the tithe is the 10% of your farm produce. Now, I know I'm not super smart, but farm produce 10% does not equate to 10% of your monthly check. It does not. So it was since then, I'm gonna say I have a little bit of critical thinking ability. It's been since then I've kind of have that in mind that what, this is not right, and I'm not gonna sit here and pretend that this is right. So it was since then I already knew that statement is not something I want to go by. All right. So, and despite this controversy, right, Pastor Adeboye emphasized that tithing should not be compulsory, and that it is a matter of personal conviction and capacity, clarifying that the focus should be on holiness and peace with others. So he said that well. So even though it's not compulsory, now everybody now knows that this is not a compulsory thing, unlike before, where a lot of people, unfortunately, took that really, really to the heart and were doing everything possible to make sure they are paying 10% of their check. And let me tell you something, most people don't even have that money, but because their father in the Lord had said they have to pay it, they do all kind of things possible to go get that money. They do all kind of stuff possible to go get that 10%, to come bring it to the church. And the formula behind that still needs to further be discussed in like a critical setting, of smart people. Like, how does you bringing 10% of your check into a church translate to you getting more money from God? How does that translate? Right now, if it's working for you or for some people, hey, good, but it doesn't translate. It doesn't. If you don't invest your money, you're not gonna make more money. Okay, now let's move on to the other question that was asked. So the other question that was asked was, what do you think about Pastor E.A. Adeboye and how he is leading his congregation and the development of his country? What do you think about Pastor E.A. Adeboye and how he is leading his congregation, meaning his members, his followers, and the development of his country? Like where does he stand? I think if I'm interpreting that question very well, where does he stand in between leading his congregation, as in leading his members, and also by leading them developing his country Nigeria. Right. So Pastor Enoch Adeboye is a highly influential figure, not only in religious cycle, but also within the broader social political context of Nigeria. Like I said, Pastor Adeboye is well known all over Nigeria. If you don't know Pastor Adeboye in Nigeria, I don't know, you probably just got to Nigeria. Even if you're not in Nigeria, a lot of people know Pastor Adeboye. He's very influential. So, as the general overseer of the Redeemed Christian Church of God, RCCG, he has overseen the expansion of one of the largest Pentecostal movement in the world. Okay, his leadership has inspired millions of Nigerians and others across the globe through the church's teaching on spirituality, personal development, and success. And like I said, he is well known for that. Like, I'm gonna give him credit, right? For the things he's doing in Nigeria. He's really doing a lot of stuff. But in the nitty-gritty of everything, there's still gonna be some criticism, coming his way. That's a sure banker. So in terms of leading his congregation, okay, Adeboye has earned widespread respect for his charismatic leadership. He's committed to biblical teachings, and he focused on prosperity theology, which emphasizes financial blessings for believers only. If you're not a believer, so his messages of faith, hope, and hard work resonate with many, particularly in Nigeria, where poverty and economic challenges are pervasive. Under his leadership, RCCG has grown massively, with branches in over 190 countries. Over 190 countries. That's to tell you how massive the congregation of the RCCG is. Now, however, there are criticisms surrounding his approach to certain doctrines, such as tithing, right, and other things. But I'm just focusing on the tithing part, right? So his suggestion that tithes should exceed the traditional 10%, potentially reaching 20%, 30%, or even 40%, has been viewed by some as exploitative, especially considering the widespread poverty in Nigeria. This has raised questions about the balance between spiritual guidance and financial expectations, with some critics accusing him of using his platform to amass wealth through his followers. Okay, I mean, anybody can easily say that, because we're still watching them talk about the 10% thing. We're still watching them talk about, if you don't pay tithe, you're not going to heaven. And now he's coming out with the 20%, 30%, or even 40%. So that has to be seen by some people as exploitative in nature. Okay, so that's what he just brought up. Now I think this is like 2 days ago. On the development of Nigeria, right? I'm still answering that question. On the development of Nigeria, Adeboye's influence has been more indirect. It's been more super indirect. He is not directly involved in political affairs. Zero, you will see his hand in political affairs. 0 times. But the social and economic messages preached through RCCG have inspired many Nigerians to engage in entrepreneurship, education, and personal improvement. That's true. I give him that. There's been when I used to go to Redeemed Christian Church of God back in Nigeria. They do so many seminars. Some churches invite people to come teach people about some skill sets, and they come and learn. So that's great. I give kudos to him for that, and I give kudos to all those parish head pastors and all the workers in all of the Redeemed Christian Church of God. Ojú tó ti mọni ní kò lè tó ti mọni rí kò lè ní òun ò mọni mọ́. That's the relationship between me and RCCG. I still know RCCG. I went to RCCG when I was growing up, and it was good, but now I'm not in for that. I don't do that anymore. Okay, so yeah. Hold on, guys. To Redeem before. I've been to Redeem before. So let's continue, right? So, however, Adeboye's reluctance to challenge the political establishment or even address the systemic corruption head on has been noted by some who believe he could play a more vocal role in advocating for structural changes in the country. This is absolutely, they nailed that on the head. Just imagine if this guy, Adeboye, some people might say, oh yeah, but he produced Osinbajo to go in the vice presidency. Yeah, maybe he's not even the one that did that. Maybe Osinbajo got into the position of the vice presidency by virtue of his qualification, and they were in need of somebody. All right, because I have never seen him directly, like head on, to play a more vocal role in advocating for structural changes in Nigeria. I've never seen him do that. Never, ever, ever, ever seen him do that. So that, for me, I don't like that. I don't like that. As a clergyman that has that kind of followers or that kind of congregation, he should consider the development of his country. Everything is not just about spirituality. No, everything should not just be about spirituality, because if everything is about spirituality, then we're on a one-way challenge. It has to be balanced. It has to be balanced. Spirituality, physical, and action. Okay, it has to be balanced. So, in summary, to answer that question, in summary, while Pastor Adeboye has undoubtedly positively impacted many lives through his spiritual teachings and social initiatives, the criticism of his financial doctrine and the perception of insufficient political engagement leave room for debate on the full scope of his influence. That is true. And I just told you that earlier. Just him not saying nothing about anything that pertains to Nigeria's political structure, structural change, anything about even the corruption. To the point where some people are even saying that most of this is an allegedly, okay, allegedly saying that most of the people that are corrupt in the government, they use the earnings from the government corruption to pay their tithe or to donate to church. A lot of people were alleging that, but of course, if you don't have evidence, I don't know how you're going to handle that. So that's that about that question. Now the next question, this question is gonna be a big one, right? So before I move on to the next question, if you're on the live, right, if you're watching this video at a later time, because I'm also gonna edit it later and put it in the video upload for more people to view this later. All right, so subscribe, hit the subscribe button. It's up here. Okay, it's up here on your screen. So hit the subscribe button, and the like button is like next to it there too. So hit the like button and subscribe. Okay, hit the like button and subscribe. So, and let me know your comments. Okay, let me know what you guys have in the comments. Let me know what you have for me in terms of question in the comment section. Okay, so moving on to the next question. That next question says, do you think that Pastor E.A. Adeboye should directly challenge political establishment when there is a need to do that? Do you personally think that Pastor E.A. Adeboye should challenge political establishment when there is a need to do that? Okay, so listen to the question very well. It's not asking if Pastor Adeboye should constantly be challenging the political establishment. Okay, it's saying when there is a need for him to do that. Is he supposed, or should he directly challenge political establishment? Now, whether Pastor Adeboye or any religious leader at all should directly challenge the political establishment is a complex issue with both ethical and practical dimensions. Okay, this is not a easy to answer question. All right, whether Pastor E. Adeboye or any other religious leader should directly challenge the political establishment is a complex issue with both ethical and practical dimensions. Okay, it's a very complex one. On one hand, there is a strong argument that religious leaders, especially those with considerable influence like Pastor Adeboye, should use their platforms to speak out against social injustice, against corruption, and other forms of wrongdoings in the government. Religious leaders have a unique position in society where they can encourage moral and ethical behaviors, not just within their congregation, but also across the broader social landscape. In many cases, the church can serve as a moral compass for the nation, guiding the people and holding political leaders accountable to principles of justice and equity. So that's the part one of the answer I have for that, right? The position of the church is mostly about guiding people spiritually and promoting moral, stuff in the church. But in the world we are today, the position of church pastors have increased. Whether you guys like it or not, your job has increased. You're not just guiding people spiritually. You guys are now part of the development of your country. So it is imperative that pastors think about the development of their society, their nation, in addition to spiritual stuff. Okay? Because in many cases, the churches can serve as a moral compass for the nation, guiding the people and holding political leaders accountable to principles of justice and equity. You can do it, pastors. You just have to grow that balls to do it. You can do it. Do it. Okay? You will see how much change will happen in your country. You will see how fast changes will happen in your country, because most of the people that come to your church, most of them are in key positions in the society. Most of them are. Most of them know what's going on in different localities. So if they're coming to your church and you're talking to them about principles of justice and equity, guess what they're gonna do? They're gonna do the same at their localities. Okay. So for instance, the challenges facing Nigeria, let's talk about that. Ranging from corruption to poor governance and economic mismanagement are deep rooted. They're deep rooted. With millions of followers, Pastor Adeboye's voice could be a powerful force for change, speaking out against these issues, advocating for better governance, and pushing for structural reforms could potentially rally a large segment of the population to demand more accountability from their leaders. Okay? Don't be surprised that your local government chairman goes to a certain Redeemed church. All right? Which, of course, they are going to. Some of them are Christians, some of them are Muslims, some of them are not practicing Christian, not practicing Muslims. But, however, the men of God are not only responsible for spiritually guiding their congregation or their followers or their members anymore. They have to now include the development of their nation into their consideration. So however, Adeboye, like many other religious leaders in Nigeria, tends to avoid direct political confrontation. They tend to avoid direct political confrontation. One possible reason is the fear of politicizing religion or alienating certain members of their congregation who might support different political parties or candidates. That's one of the reasons they're doing that. That's one of the reasons they kept short. Pim, you will not hear pim from some influential pastors in Nigeria. Pim, you will not hear. You will not hear them challenge the wrongdoings in in the government. You will not hear them say pim, So religion in Nigeria, as in many parts of the world, is deeply intertwined with politics, and making bold political statements could risk dividing his followers. You get that, right? So when they make such bold political statements, it might divide their followers, because some of their followers might not agree with what they just said, and some may agree, and from there will be a divide, but they're not supposed to make people be divided. They're supposed to bring people together. So that is their excuse. That's why they said they don't say nothing, about the politics of the nation. They don't say pim. So they are afraid of causing a divide in the church. That's why they are doing that. So additionally, many religious leaders believe that their primary role is to focus on spiritual matters and not to get entangled in the contentious and often corrupt world of politics. Especially the country where Pastor Adeboye is, the corruption level there is in the highs. Okay, it's high level of corruption. All right, let me just even call it high level of brutality, because that's beyond corruption now. That being said, right? Silence, it is important to know that silence or neutrality can sometimes be viewed as tacit approval of the status quo, especially when serious issues like corruption and human rights violation persist. Did you hear that, men of God, pastors? This is why you should find a way. I know it's going to be difficult for you guys, but you guys can do it, okay? Just find a way to incorporate, these things into your Christianity and clergyman work, okay? Find a way to challenge the status quo. I mean, some pastors are doing this thing, right? Some pastors in Nigeria, they are actually challenging, the federal government anytime they do something wrong. They're challenging the governor of their state. There's very few of them that do this. Very, very few of them, okay, that does what I'm talking about. But it is important, it is imperative that many more pastors start to do that now. It's important that many more pastors get on that train, because if they don't get on that train, there is fire on the mountain. Oh, hey. Leaders like Archbishop Desmond Tutu of South Africa and Martin Luther King Jr. in the United States are examples of religious figures who took on political systems because of a moral imperative to advocate for justice. Did you hear that, pastors in Nigeria? Why don't you look at the examples that I just said? Pastor Bishop Tutu, Martin Luther King Jr. These were all men of God. They were not afraid. They were not afraid to look at the government eyes and tell them the truth. After all, it's there in the Bible that ye shall know the truth, and the truth shall set you free. right? So those are great examples. So this is possible, right? Their involvement in political issues didn't detract from their spiritual influence, but rather it elevated it by aligning faith with the pursuit of justice. Guys, let me tell you something right now. I think if not for a lot of people like Martin Luther King, right? If not for a lot of people, like, I did not say it's only Martin Luther King, guys. All right. If not for the effort of a lot of black men of God and Martin Luther King, maybe somebody like me will not even be able to come to America in this day and age. Do you guys know what I'm talking about? I don't want to go into that details, but maybe it's not for their standing up to the wrongdoings in the government. If not for their effort, Martin Luther King even died in that process. I'm not sure about Bishop Desmond Tutu of South Africa. I'm probably sure he also died in the course of doing that. But these guys, they made it possible for the future generation to now be able to be free. Simply put, to be free. Even though some people can still debate that freedom is not there yet, it's just some level of freedom, not all freedom in its entirety. Okay, so that is that, right? So pastors in Nigeria, you guys can do it too. Think about your congregation. Okay, think about that 11-year-old youth that's in your church, that's thinking about tomorrow, that how is my future gonna be in this country? Think about that 9-year-old girl that's in your church, that's probably an orphan, and she's thinking about the future, about what her tomorrow would be. Think about the single mothers in your church with kids. Think about the single fathers too. Think about the future of everybody in your congregation, period. Don't stick to just spiritual stuff only. Learn to develop your congregation. Learn to teach them things that will make them have critical thinking and be making better decisions. So in conclusion on that question, while there are risks in directly challenging political establishments, Pastor Adeboye's influence can be a significant force for positive change in Nigeria. Whether or not he chooses to take a more vocal stance or political issues will depend on his personal convictions. But the potential impact of such action on Nigeria's development could be profound. Okay, if Pastor Adeboye wakes up tomorrow and choose to start doing the right thing by challenging the wrongdoings, head on, right? Not on the G. He probably talks to the president and the governors and the senators on the low. Like none of us will know. Nobody will know about that. Only some few people will know. But he probably will not bring it to the open, because Christians love to do stuff like that. They love to not let anybody do. I think in the Christian is when they say, when your left hand gives, do not let your right hand know. And my question for that is, if your left hand doesn't let your right hand know, how is your right hand going to know to be able to do the same? How is your right hand going to learn how to be able to give? What if the right hand needs to see that so it can be able to also give? So start bringing that thing, start doing it publicly, head on. Stop hiding under the umbrella of spirituality, right? All right, so that's that about that question, right? So before I move to the next question, if you're still watching, thank you for watching, and I'm seeking your indulgence to click the subscribe button and click the like button, right? And support this channel. So the next question is this: with Pastor Adeboye's conviction on tithing, do you think he is expressing extortion fully more on vulnerable Nigerians? That's the main question in people's mind now. Do you think after he said 10% is for beginners and 20%, 30%, and 40% should be for more mature Christians, do you think is fully more extorting the vulnerable Nigerians? That's the question. What do you think? This is a tough question. Who is asking all these tough and difficult questions? That's a tough question. Do we think Pastor Adeboye is saying 10% tithing is for the beginner Christian and 20%, 30%, and 40% is for the mature Christian, and then capital and said tithing is not mandatory and it's not forceful on you? You can give according to your capacity. You can give according to what you have, but 10% is for beginner, 20%, 30%, 40% to mature Christians according to their ability. Do you think he's extorting the vulnerable Nigerians more, or what do you think? Here we go. This is a very tough question. Pastor Adeboye's teaching on tithing, especially his recent suggestions that committed Christians should consider giving beyond the traditional 10%, has drawn criticism, with some people accusing him of exploiting vulnerable Nigerians. In a country where many face economic challenges, calls for increased financial contributions to the church can be seen as burdensome, particularly for those who are struggling to meet basic needs. That is just it. There's no other way to answer this. That is just it. It's gonna be seen as burdensome. In fact, it is burdensome on many Nigerians. It is burdensome on a lot of Nigerians. So, no, I do not agree with that. Even though you said it is not mandatory, don't put it that way. You're just being political with it. Now, critics argue that such teaching especially when coming from influential religious leaders like Adeboye, can put psychological pressure on believers. It's going to put psychological pressure on believers because even the 10% is already putting psychological super pressure on the believers. Now that the 20% and the 30% and the 40% is coming out, it's going to definitely put more psychological pressure on believers. Many church members trust their pastors deeply, and they may feel obligated to give more than they can afford. This is common in Nigeria. And they will be believing that failing to do so could jeopardize their spiritual standings. Example, although he retracted that statement that they will not go to heaven if they don't pay tithe, even though he has retracted it, but because many church members in Nigeria, they so much trust their pastor deeply, they will still feel obligated to give more than they can afford. That's just that thing that, see, and I think these pastors know the level and the power of their influence on Nigerians. They know how strong it is. They know how deep that hold is on Nigerian members. They do. But the vulnerable Nigerians don't know that they can break out of it. They don't know. They have not been taught how to critically think. They have not been taught how to say no. They have not been taught how to reject something. They have only been taught how to say yes, not even no. So that, can be argued that, such teachings that 20%, 30%, 10%, even though it's not mandatory, should be for beginner and mature Christian respectfully. That teaching is, especially when coming from influential religious leaders like Pastor Adeboye, it will put psychological pressure on believers. Many church members trust their pastors deeply, and they may feel obligated to give more than they can afford, believing that failing to do so could jeopardize their spiritual standing. This becomes especially concerning when religious teachings are framed in a way that suggests material blessings are contingent on financial giving. Did you guys hear that? It's concerning when religious teachings are framed in a way that suggests material blessings are contingent on financial giving. Let me break it down. They're saying that teaching people that when you give 5 naira or when you give $5, you are going to see blessings from God. Blessings of what? Has anyone ever really asked? Well, some pastors may even say blessing of protection from God, blessing of being able to wake up the next day peacefully without being dead by God, blessings for having children, blessings for seeing mercy from people, blessings from seeing protection or miraculously from people. Stop it. All those teachings that are framed in a way that suggests that when you give money you will get blessing. is concerning. It is concerning. It is concerning. So, for example, right? So Adeboye previously, his previous statement that non-payment of tithe could prevent someone from making heaven, though he later retracted that statement. That statement had already planted a sense of fear in some believers, a really deep fear in some believers. Even with the retraction, his suggestion that 10% is for beginners and that more mature Christians should consider giving 20%, 30%, or even 40% could be seen as shifting the narrative towards higher financial expectations, which some critics view as exploitative. It is exploitative. It is exploitative. Think about it. Now, on the other hand, Adeboye's defenders argue that he's teaching principles of giving out of faith and that the Bible encourages generosity. They suggest that the focus is on spiritual growth and not coercion, pointing out that Adeboye has clarified that tithing is not compulsory. He has clarified that it is not compulsory. But we know how deeply the members are influenced by their clergymen, by their pastors. So ultimately, whether this constitutes extortion depends on the perspective of the individual believer. If people feel coerced or manipulated into giving more than they can afford, it could be seen as exploitative. However, others may see it as a spiritual practice that helps them develop faith and trust in God. The challenge lies in how religious teachings on giving are framed and whether they take into account the economic realities of the congregation. And you all know the economic reality of the congregation in Nigeria right now. The economic reality is that they are hungry. They said it, not me. The economic reality is that they being power. They don't have money. They don't have protection. They don't have electricity. They don't have good road. They don't have easy access to transportation. They don't have easy access to clean water. They don't have easy access to even buy food. Some of them don't even have easy access to their own farmland so they can grow even food for the masses. Some of them don't have freedom of expression. Some of them don't have nothing. That is the reality of most Nigerians in today's day and age. All right, so moving on to the next question, guys. So again, if you're still watching, thank you for sticking around. I appreciate that. And if you're new, please click the subscribe button and click the like button. Okay. So the next question here is saying, do you think that Pastor Adeboye will ever directly speak to the economic realities of his congregation and suggest few way out of these economic realities? Let me take that question again. Do you think that Pastor E.A. Adeboye will ever directly speak to the economic realities of his congregation, and will he ever suggest a few way out of it? So, thinking about that question, it is possible. It is possible that Pastor Adeboye might address the economic realities of his congregation more directly in the future. But whether he will take a practical approach with specific solutions remains uncertain. So far, his focus has been largely spiritual, urging members to rely on faith and divine providence, often linking prosperity to tithing and giving. This kind of message resonates deeply with his followers, especially in a country where poverty is widespread, because it offers hope through religious faith. So it is possible in the future that Pastor Adeboye might do that. However, Pastor Adeboye has not typically offered detailed practical or economic advice beyond spiritual teachings. If it's not spiritual, he hasn't offered those detailed practical or economic advice. While the Redeemed Christian Church of God, RCCG, has engaged in charity work such as funding schools, funding hospitals, and funding social welfare projects, it doesn't seem like Adeboye has been particularly vocal about advocating for structural economic changes or proposing actionable steps for his followers to improve their financial situation in practical, non-spiritual ways. He has not. Okay, maybe in the future he will do that. But right now he has not. And he has been seen, engaging in charity work such as funding schools, funding hospitals, funding social welfare projects. All right. How about teaching people how to become fishermen on their own? Stop feeding them fish. How about helping them to become a fisherman on their own? All right, by letting them keep in that money so they can use it on things that may improve their life. Critics argue that religious leaders like Adeboye should go beyond spiritual messages to address real world economic hardship more directly. Nigerians' vast wealth gap, unemployment, and inflation affect millions, and there is potential for leaders like Adeboye to take a more active role in discussing these issues and proposing tangible solutions, such as promoting financial literacy, promoting entrepreneurship, or advocating for government policies that favor economic equity. You can do this. So the last thing I would say on that question is this: while he might touch on economic realities in his sermons, it is uncertain if Pastor Adeboye will pivot towards a moral, practical, solution-based approach. Much of Pastor Adeboye's message remains grounded on faith, which can inspire hope but might not address the complex economic challenges that his followers face on a daily basis. So that's how that's gonna go. That's the best I can give you on that question. So moving on to the next question. The next question here says, considering his recent retraction, is it fair to say that Pastor Adeboye is not focused on promoting Nigeria's development? Considering his recent retraction about that 10% tightening and then adding 20, 30, 40%, is it fair to say that Pastor Adeboye is not focused on promoting Nigeria's development? Is it fair to say that? And here is the answer I have for you guys, right? While it might not be entirely fair to say that Pastor Adeboye is not focused on promoting Nigeria's development, his primary focus appears to be on spiritual growth and prosperity through faith, rather than actively addressing or advocating for structural changes in Nigeria's development. His teachings and influence certainly impact many Nigerians on a personal level, offering hope and moral guidance. But his approach to national development has largely remained with the framework of religious teachings. So, for example, Adeboye's recent retraction of his claim that non-payment of tithe could prevent someone from going to heaven shows a willingness to correct certain spiritual doctrine. But this correction will center on matters of faith rather than economic or social development. So his suggestion that members of his congregation give more than the traditional 10% tithes, for those capable of doing so, has stirred controversy, especially given the economic hardship many Nigerians face. So critics argue that this focus on giving to the church overlooks the more immediate practical economic challenges that's confronting his followers. However, I like all these howevers, right? So, however, it is important to acknowledge that the RCCG under Adeboye has contributed to Nigeria's development in other ways. This is true. If you don't know the meaning of that, ask me in the comment section. The church has invested in educational and healthcare initiatives, which are valuable contributions to society. RCCG institutions, such as schools and universities, provide opportunities for education, which can play a role in long-term national development. In addition, the church has charitable programs aimed at helping the poor and needy. So he's actually doing something, right? He's doing, I think, a lot more. So his critics should take it easy on him. Nevertheless, Adeboye has not positioned himself as a vocal advocate for systemic, economic, or political reforms. While he holds significant influence, his public messages typically encourage reliance on faith and divine intervention rather than urging for specific governmental or policy changes that might drive economic or infrastructural development. Can you see that? I hope you guys can see the difference. Like, if you're relying on faith and divine intervention rather than talking to the people that can actually physically do something, I don't see what you're doing. I don't. No, I don't. I give you credit for the school. I give him credit for creating university because that encourages learning and bringing more people out of darkness, so to say. But you got to do more because the population of people that are able to go to that center for learning is very, very minute compared to the millions, of even just your other members, because not all your members are going to be able to attend your school. That's a fact. You can't possibly accept all of your members into your school. It's impossible. So this is why you still have to head on challenge these things. Talk to the government about specific governmental or policy change that might drive economic or infrastructural development. Come on, you can do it. So in summary, while Pastor Adeboye contributes indirectly to Nigeria's development through spiritual and charitable means, his approach is not primarily focused on tackling the country's deeper economic issues. His focus remains largely on personal prosperity through faith, leaving some to wish he would address the structural realities more directly. More directly. So I'm going to move on to the next question, guys. So this next question here says, in looking at all the progress seen in Nigeria, all the progress that is seen in Nigeria, right? In looking at all of those progress, right? Would you say brain power in Nigeria is beginning to develop? Would you say brain power in Nigeria is beginning to develop? Yes, it is fair to say that brain power and intellectual capability in Nigeria are steadily developing, despite ongoing challenges. Several indicators point to a growth in intellectual development and innovation across various sectors in the country. Right? It's fair to say that the brain power and the intellectual capacity in Nigeria are steadily developing, despite ongoing challenges. It's fair to say that it's developing. Several indicators point to a growth in intellectual development and innovation across various sectors in the country. I'm just gonna give you the in the educational sector, there's educational progress. There is tech and innovation hubs progress. There is diaspora contribution. All right, people abroad are contributing to the development of Nigeria. There's government initiative and private investment. However, significant changes remain, such as underfunding in education, limited access to quality infrastructure, and brain drain, where many skilled Nigerians seek opportunities abroad due to limited prospects at home. Despite these issues, there is an undeniable upward trend in intellectual development, with many Nigerians making notable strides on the global stage in various fields. I mean, I can say I'm one of the developing people, all right? Even though I don't live there, but I was born there, all right? So there's certainly there is been development, all right? People are developing intellectually in Nigeria, and a lot of development is happening in Nigeria. So in conclusion, brain power in Nigeria is developing and gaining momentum, especially in technology, in education, and in entrepreneurship. But the full potential is yet to be realized due to systemic challenges. Continued investment in education and innovation, as well as creating more opportunities for skilled professionals within the country, will be key to sustaining this growth. Okay, that's that on that. All right, the next question: is it fair to say that faith and pastors in Nigeria have contributed to the slow brain power development? Where are these questions coming from? Is it fair to say that faith and pastors, faith, right, and pastors in Nigeria have contributed to the slow brain power development? Okay. This one go mama. It is complex to answer this question. So yes, it's a complex issue to assess whether faith and pastors in Nigeria have contributed to the slow development of brain power, and there are arguments on both sides. There are arguments that support that faith and pastors contributed to the slow development of brain power in Nigeria, and there are also arguments that support faith and pastors did not contribute to the slow development of brain power in Nigeria. So I'm just gonna talk about them very skimpily, if that's a word. Okay. So, but we're gonna first talk about how faith and pastors might hinder intellectual development. How faith and pastors might hinder intellectual development. The first thing is the focus on spiritual prosperity over practical solutions. The focus on spiritual prosperity over practical solution. In many cases, Nigerian religious leaders, including some prominent pastors, they have placed a strong emphasis on spiritual solutions instead of practical problems. Instead of practical problem solving, they try to use spiritual solution to solve a practical problem. See what I'm saying? Back in those days, God was able to turn water into wine. I mean, Jesus was able to turn water into wine. He was able to send locusts to destroy the farm. He was able to do a lot of things back then. The men of God he used back then, they had faith that God is going to do it. And these days that we are, this 2024, the 21st century, men of God are still relying on spiritual solutions to solve practical problems. They're still relying on spiritual solutions to solve practical problems. Messages that focus heavily on faith-based prosperity, such as tithing, miracles, and divine intervention for success. All this kind of doctrine may lead followers to rely more on spiritual practices than on education, than on critical thinking, or than on skill development. This can create an environment where people may not fully invest in intellectual growth or innovation because they are expecting a divine solutions to a life and real challenges. They're expecting a spiritual solution to a practical challenge. That's one way that faith and pastors are slowing down intellectual development, brain power. Okay, that's one way. Another way that they are slowing it down is that they are anti-intellectualism in religious techniques. Anti-intellectualism in religious techniques. And I will explain that. So, some religious teachings have been criticized for discouraging questioning and critical thinking. You cannot ask questions, you cannot think. In a highly religious society like Nigeria, where church teachings have significant influence, discouraging questioning can limit intellectual curiosity and critical injury on inquiry, both of which are essential for brain power development. If you don't question and you don't inquire, you can have a brain power development. And some of this anti-intellectualism in religious teaching is discouraging questioning, and that is limiting intellectual curiosity, and critically inquiring about things. Both things are needed for brain power development. So this is one of the ways faith and pastors are slowing down the brain power development in Nigeria. This can be seen when some religious leaders equate questioning religious practices or religious teaching with a lack of faith, potentially stifling open debates and intellectual progress. They say you lack faith, that's why you're asking. They say you lack faith, that's why you're debating stuff. They don't let you do that. So faith and pastors are responsible. Economic focus on religious giving. Economic focus on religious giving. What does this mean? The heavy financial demands that are placed on congregants, such as the expectation of paying tithes or offerings, can sometimes lead to economic strain. For many, the pressure to give can detract from personal investment in education or entrepreneurship pursuit, especially in an economy where resources are scarce. This could show individual progress in areas like skill development and education. This could slow individual progress in areas like skill development and education. When you economically focus on religious giving, you are giving your tithes, you are giving offering, you are doing special donations, giving your money, giving. There's no area where you are taking that is proportionate to that giving. All this can sometimes lead to economic strain on the congregation. And then when that happens, that pressure to give, it can distract or detract from personal investment. You cannot do a personal investment on education because you don't have the money. You already gave it to the church, relying on faith that you're gonna be somehow miraculously admitted into the school. So all these things could slow individual progress in areas like skill development and education. All right. But if you have your money to start a skill learning, don't go and give it to a church in the name of tithe or something like that. Don't do that, please. Now, how faith and pastors might contribute to the development of brain power. Moral and ethical foundation. Moral and ethical foundation. This is known with churches that church is a holy place. It's a place where you have to be a saint. You have to do the right thing. You can't even look at your congregation in some certain ways. You have to be holy, in the church. Most people know that. Okay. So moral and ethical foundation. So on the flip side, many pastors in Nigeria promote education, hard work, and discipline within their teachings. So that's a good thing, okay? They do that within their teachings. That's a good thing. Charity and social program. Many churches in Nigeria, including those led by prominent pastors, engage in social initiatives that promote education, healthcare, and social welfare. Okay, that's a good thing. Then community engagement is another thing. Religious institutions often provide platforms for networking and community development. And that's true also. I remember there's a religious institution in Nigeria called Full Gospel Businessmen Fellowship. I've been there too before, and I've benefited from that kind of religious institution. I work for them. I got paid. If there was no such religious institution, I would not get paid money. And it was while I was at that religious institution that I actually applied to come live in the United States, right? So maybe if I wasn't there at that point in time, maybe my process wouldn't have gone through successfully, right? So even though that's a story for another day, I'll tell you that story another day. I haven't told you guys that story yet. All of my 14,000 subscribers. I'll tell you that story one day, how I became an American. All right. So in conclusion, ladies and gentlemen, while faith and religious leaders may unintentionally contribute to a slower pace of intellectual development in some cases, especially through messages that emphasize reliance on spiritual solutions over practical efforts. Their influence is nuanced. Many pastors have also contributed to Nigeria's development by providing moral leadership, by providing educational opportunities, and by providing social programs. Ultimately, the balance between spiritual guidance and promoting intellectual inquiry is critical, and how this balance is managed can either slow or accelerate brain power development in Nigeria. You've heard it. So you've got, yes, faith and pastors, they're slowing down the brain power development in Nigeria. And you've also heard, yes, faith and pastors in Nigeria are also supporting brain power development in Nigeria. So the court is now in your ball. The ball is now in your court. I'm reversing that. So, well, let me take one more question. In what practical ways could Pastor Adeboye directly contribute to brain power development in Nigeria and speak to political instability? In what practical ways could Pastor Adeboye directly contribute to brain power development in Nigeria and speak to political instability? This is another big question. This is big. Yes, there are ways. So Pastor Adeboye, given his vast influence in Nigeria, he has the potential to make significant contributions to brain power development and also address political instability. Here are some practical ways that Pastor Adeboye could achieve this. One way is to promote critical thinking and education in his sermon. He can promote critical thinking and education in his sermons. That's one way. When he promotes critical thinking and education in his sermon, he's gonna help develop brain power in Nigeria. So Adeboye could leverage his platform to promote critical thinking, science, and innovation in Nigeria. Instead of focusing primarily on spiritual solution for prosperity, he could encourage his followers to prioritize education, to prioritize skill development, and to prioritize entrepreneurship. For example, by advocating for investment in science, technology, engineering, and mathematics education, and offering scholarship or grants through the RCCG networks, he could directly contribute to intellectual development. I think he might be already doing this through his university or through some programs in his church, but I don't know this for sure, but that's surely one way. Okay, he can partner with educational institutions. After all, some of the provosts in some universities in Nigeria are members of RCCG, right? So the RCCG could collaborate with Nigerian universities and international institutions to create programs that emphasizes critical thinking, research, and technological advancement. This could include funding research projects or hosting intellectual forums that tackle Nigeria's economic, scientific, and social challenges. That's one way that you can do that, Pastor Adeboye. Another way that Pastor Adeboye could increase brain power development in Nigeria is to empower youth through tech and entrepreneurship. Those two should not be far from the youth. Okay, so Nigeria's tech industry is booming right now because there is a lot of new development happening in Nigeria. So Nigeria's tech industry is booming. All right, with cities like Lagos becoming hubs for startups and innovation, Pastor Adeboye could actively promote entrepreneurship by establishing incubators or offering church-run programs that teach coding, business skills, and leadership to young Nigerians. In fact, this is highly encouraged because, guys, the future is going towards tech. All right, in my own opinion, I think the future is going towards tech, and that has come to stay. That's not gonna change. RCCG tech hubs and innovation centers can be something that Adeboye establishes. That's one way to help. He's got the money. Another way for him to do this is to be directly involved in social and economic policies. As Adeboye, you can do it. You need to be directly involved in social and economic policies. All right. Although Adeboye has traditionally stayed out of direct political engagement, he could use his influence to speak to political leaders about creating more effective policies that promote education, healthcare, and economic equity. For example, during public forums or RCCG convention or conferences, Pastor Adeboye could invite policymakers to discuss strategies for reforming the educational system, improving governance, and addressing systemic corruption. Okay, Pastor Adeboye, you can do that. Please do that. Invite policymakers to come and discuss strategies that they can use to reform the educational system, to reform or to improve governance, and also to address systemic corruption. You can even go on, you can even start a radio station in your institution and use it to address public directly. Advocate for policy change. Pastor Adeboye, advocate for policy change, please. And then you can also use your sermon to promote national unity and good governance. Use your sermon to promote national unity and good governance. Adeboye could use his sermons to address political instability by promoting values of good governance, integrity, and peace. He could call out corruption, inefficiency, and the lack of accountability in political leadership, and emphasize the importance of ethical leadership for national development. By linking spiritual principles to governance issues, he could inspire a cultural shift where political and business leaders prioritize the public good over personal gain. Okay, and that's a big thing. There's a need to increase the awareness of public good over personal gain. Up till now, most politicians are mostly into personal gain when they're supposed to be focusing on public good, right? So, Pastor Adeboye, please encourage civic engagement and expand the role of RCCG in community development. foster dialogue on national issues. All right, initiate it, do that dialogue, talk to people. Adeboye could organize national forums or conferences where experts, politicians, and citizens can gather to discuss Nigeria's key issues, such as political instability, economic reform, and social justice. This forum could help bridge the gap between religious teachings and practical solutions to national problems. They will come when you invite them. Trust me, they will come. You will give them honorarium. Give them an honorarium. They've been giving you honorarium and your pastor's honorarium. It's time for you to invite these people. Okay? Invite them to foster dialogue on national issues. Let them come and talk. Let them come and, This forum could help bridge the gap between religious teachings and the practical solutions to national problems. So in conclusion on that question, Pastor Adeboye holds a unique position of influence in Nigeria, and he has the potential to drive intellectual development and address political instability by encouraging education, critical thinking, entrepreneurship, and civic engagement. While his spiritual teachings have already shaped millions of lives, no doubt about that, a stronger focus on these practical initiatives could further accelerate Nigeria's progress. So, ladies and gentlemen, in conclusion, right, we have talked about Pastor Enoch Adeboye's recent retraction concerning tithing, where he apologized for stating that non-payment of tithe could prevent one from making heaven. We talked about that. He clarified that such a claim is not biblically supported, and he went further to suggest that tithing should not be limited to 10%, but could go as high as 20%, 30%, or even 40% for those capable of giving more. This statement has drawn both support and criticism, with many seeing these kind of statements as burdensome or vulnerable Nigerians that are facing economic challenge at this time. So we talked about that, right? And then we explored whether Adeboye's focus on spiritual prosperity and increased tithing might hinder Nigeria's intellectual and economic development. We talked about that. So if you remember, so his heavy emphasis on religious giving without directly addressing practical solutions to poverty and economic challenges could potentially slow the development of brain power. Teaching spirituality without providing direct practical solutions, that's not going to promote brain power. Okay. While his influence brings hope and moral guidance to millions, critics argue that he could do more to promote critical thinking and practical solutions for personal and national progress. We talked about that, and we also talked about Pastor Adeboye's contribution to Nigeria's development through charity, through education, and through health initiatives should not be overlooked. Okay, he's doing something, all right? So don't let us overlook that. He's doing something. So the Redeemed Christian Church of God has built universities, schools, and hospitals. They have indirectly contributed to human capital development in Nigeria. Still, Adeboye has avoided directly confronting Nigeria's political system or offering actionable strategies for improving governance and economic equity, which many believe could further accelerate national progress. So, but most people still want to see him directly confront Nigeria's political system, and they want to see him offer actionable strategies to improve governance in Nigeria, to improve economic equity, right? Many believe that Pastor Adeboye can further accelerate national progress. I believe that too. I believe it. We discussed ways in which Adeboye could more directly contribute to intellectual development and address political instability in Nigeria by promoting critical thinking, by fostering entrepreneurship, by encouraging civic engagement, and by creating forums for dialogue on national issues. Adeboye could leverage his vast influence to drive structural changes in education, governance, and economic development. And finally, in my conclusion, ladies and gentlemen, while Pastor Adeboye's spiritual leadership has positively impacted many Nigerians, no doubt about that, his approach to national issues remains focused on faith and personal prosperity. To have a more transformative effect on Nigeria's development, particularly in intellectual growth and political stability, Pastor Adeboye, you need to engage more directly with practical solutions and advocate for systemic reforms. You need to engage more directly with practical solutions and advocate for systemic reforms. Again, Pastor Adeboye, please engage more directly with practical solutions and advocate for systemic change in Nigeria. I'm begging you, please. That is all I have for everybody today. This has been my longest ever live video on YouTube, and at this point, if you're still watching this, I do not expect most people to still be watching this, because topics like this are boring to a lot of people because they do not have much of critical thinking, and they do not like to listen to things that will talk to their critical thinking, or that would just sound like not fun to them. So, but if you're still watching this video till this time, I really appreciate you, and I thank you, and I give you kudos. Thank you for watching, and I'm going to call it a wrap now. See you in other video. Have a good night wherever you are. Again, all the Kamala Harris lovers, have a good night. All the Trump lovers, have a good night. Wherever you're located, whether in America or in Nigeria or anywhere in the world, have a good night, have a good morning, have a good day. See you in another video. Bye bye for now.